Welcome to another episode of the Huxley Morton podcast. This week, I am joined by Jim Housk, the CEO and founder of Sensor Pharmaceuticals. Jim, you and I have had quite a few conversations off air. I think there's a lot of similarities and we agree on a lot of things. But look, rather than me giving you a bit of an intro, give us a bit of an introduction as to yourself and Sensor as a business.
Sure. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York City. Went to school at various universities across the country. Had a postdoc, finished a postdoc at UC Berkeley, and joined Pfizer, where I started my career.
Yeah.
Pfizer to Seprecor, which is a company that now is called Synovion. Those two companies
I
together.
didn't realize. I've heard of Synovion. I didn't realize
Yes.
that Seprecor was Synovion now.
Yeah, what happened? Seprecor was purchased by a Japanese company, and that company renamed it Synovion, and it's still local to a site in Massachusetts where it was. Massachusetts State in the United States. Boston is the big city that people recognize. Cambridge is a hub of biotechnology. But those two stops were important to me and get me to Sensor, not directly, but indirectly. Pfizer taught me all and more than I could possibly.
So at Sensor, Jim, what's
Yes.
that's the current business. What are you guys now? I understand you're a virtual drug
Yep.
discovery company. What's
That's
the
right.
focus for you guys though?
Well, it was weight and neuropsychological or behavioral diseases, and obesity and eating behaviors, depression. These are all interconnected.
Right.
It turns out, and it just so happens that starting about 2012, I was at a conference and learned about for the first time, although I don't think it was the first time it was ever spoken, but the first time I learned about the so-called gut-brain connection, this axis where you can access molecular target or signal transduction in the brain from the gut and from the brain back to the gut. Why that is important was not really clear to me at the time, but Sensor focused on that. And fortunately, I've been able now to get a transaction where I've been able to sell Sensor. We haven't completed the transaction, so it's not a sale quite yet, but it should be in a couple of weeks, maybe a month. And I've then been incorporated into, if you will, the new entity called Diamond Pharmaceuticals, Inc. I don't like the name of the company, but I didn't name it.
You can't win them all, Jim. You can't win them all.
No. Well, no, but at least it has one part right. It does tell you kind of what we do, and what a big part of that was taking advantage of natural products, whether they're fermentation products or botanicals, and that kind of intersects with the current, not the current craze. It was a current craze about 2 years ago with respect to cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system.
Cannabinoids, please explain that to me. You just
Sure,
baffled my brain
sure.
with that word. I've not come across
Sure.
that, and yeah, I'm someone who's quite into I guess metabolic reactions and
Yes.
how the brain and the gut works. You know, being quite a big fitness fanatic myself, I guess the food, the brain, the mood all go
Yes,
together when
they do.
training and up
Yes.
a cycle of diet, etc. So yeah, what does that word mean to a 6-year-old as it may be?
That's interesting. No, that's an interesting point. That's actually, I read somewhere a very long time ago that if you can explain what you do to a 6-year-old such that they can understand it, but you don't sugarcoat it, you actually explain it. That doesn't mean you use words that they don't understand. You use words that are translatable and understandable. And so if you can't do that, then you meaning me, the explainer, doesn't really know what the hell what he or she is speaking.
Yeah.
And I've taken that to heart. So you ask actually a really, really important question. The notion that what we eat impacts how we feel emotionally and impacts our ability to actually perform. So our physical selves and our emotional selves are impacted by what we eat. And why is that? Well, mostly because we have a resident group of visitors in our gut, bacteria, that belong there. Many, many of them. Some from time to time don't. They take the stuff that we eat and they metabolize it, and they create so-called secondary metabolites. And secondary metabolites are things like, for example, if it were a fermentation, bacteria make things like antibacterials, if you think about it. So bacteria will make erythromycin. Bacteria will make penicillins. Bacteria make cephalosporins. Bacteria also make things that have been now understood to be important for control of cardiovascular diseases. HMG-CoA reductase actually inhibitors started from a natural product that was found from fermentation. Point is that the food that we put into our gullets are metabolized. The foods are metabolized by the resident bacteria at different parts of our gut at different times. And they create secondary metabolites that are in fact signaling molecules, meaning they recognize targets, molecular targets that are expressed in various parts of our gut. And they send signals. Some signals they send to other organs in the periphery. Some signals are sent to the brain. It's an extraordinary thing. And so what you tell the 6-year-old, the reason you can't have pudding today at this time is that you'll be eating too much sugar. And too much sugar today at this time isn't good for you. However, if you eat this egg with protein at this time of day is better for you. And you'll feel stronger, you'll feel better, you'll be more alert.
Yeah.
Now, so that's in a very crude way.
And what was the science term that you put for that at the beginning of the question? Was it
cannabinoids? Yeah, yes, the cannabinoids.
Cannabinoid.
Yeah, the cannabinoid. Yeah, the endocannabinoid system really is the idea that marijuana and the large number of natural products, again, terpenoid-like and secondary metabolites for that particular plant, the marijuana plant or the hemp plant, they produce hundreds of these types of structures in a family termed the cannabinoids. And we in turn have the same molecular target, the same receptor that's in the plant that is searching for its endogenous, meaning the local, we create target. We create ligand, and that ligand, in our case, there are two. Anandamide is one, and 2-arachidylglycerol was another. The point is that these ligands, although they're different, marijuana does not. Delta-9 THC, the active component of marijuana, looks nothing to a first approximation like anandamide. Yet anandamide and delta-9 THC interact with the same molecular target, because we express the same molecular target as the plant does. And so the cannabinoid.
Are you, in terms of Sensor then, are you telling me effectively that you guys are a drug development business that can almost pinpoint certain drugs and, things that people should be eating in order to reduce metabolic disease and improve general health, fitness, well-being, and feeling it as it may be?
Yes, and we have some intellectual property too that relates to, we have the ability to deliver via an oral administration, so a pill, a capsule, material, and we can release it at various places along the gut. And there are reasons to do that. And so we have that ability. And I think, to put it in perspective, you have to be very, very careful, James, because there's a lot of, like in anything, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of, for lack of better term, smoke. It's we are talking about marijuana after all, and there's a lot of smoke, and people tend to become almost religious. They become fanatical. That if you say, well, that doesn't seem quite right, based on a more well-controlled, well-run clinical trial, that doesn't jive with the reality of the experiment. There are people that find that you're saying something terrible about them and the way they think, and that you're anti. It's a very strange response. So I'm very
What
careful.
sort of size are the trials that you guys run for this sort of thing, and
Well,
what are the general patient population like? Because it's,
yeah.
I guess it's, I guess it's different to an oncology trial or something where there's a huge demand for this sort of trial. So patient enrollment must be quite difficult for you guys. How do
Well,
you go about that?
I'll tell you what, the people that I look to, or the company that I looked to for inspiration and also for insight, is a company that was it's a UK based was a UK based company.
Mm.
It's called GW Pharma, or GW
Uh-huh.
Pharmaceuticals. Now they've just been bought recently, within a few weeks, I believe, and they are a remarkable group.
Mm.
They were given a certain amount of money, I believe, but they were certainly given the IP around looking at effectively the marijuana plant's active materials
Mm-hmm.
to see what medicinal utility. Now, this was done at a time when it was even worse than it is today with respect to it's verboten to work on things like LSD, marijuana.
Wow.
Um, uh, and all this is coming back now,
Mm.
fortunately, because there's real utility for treatment of human health. I would say a long way around. Uh, I recommend talk with those guys because they were pariahs. They were laughed at. They were put down as the marijuana the marijuana smokers. It
Yeah.
was terrible. In a way, they were like poop. What are these guys? Well, they are a brilliant bunch of people, hardworking, and they've been proven correct because they've actually have. And this answers your question. They've run very well controlled clinical trials
Mm-hmm.
and they've recruited patients. They have patients, and to show you how safe what they have isolated from the plant and use in their formulation from the plant, the botanical,
Yeah.
the cannabinoid type, uh, they've been able to get it approved for children or for very young people, relatively speaking. I think from as young as 6
Wow.
to 12. Yeah. And so I strongly recommend because the courage it took. I mean, part of what we're supposed to be is if we're setting out on our own, we're supposed to have some amount of vision. I don't know that I have that. We're supposed to have some amount of courage. I don't know if I'm courageous. It's just stupid. But these guys at GW are neither stupid nor lacking courage. They clearly have both. And so
Amazing.
I follow in their footsteps in the sense that it became clear to me from watching them from a great distance that they understood that if you ran a trial in a well-controlled, positive and negative controls, uh, uh, multi-center trial, that in fact you will get people to understand. Take the way people throw words out at you or the way they characterize what you do.
Mm.
That was just waters off a duck's back.
Yeah, they just got
They
got
just
on with what they were doing.
plowed on, yeah, because they were right. They believed. And here's something that I do believe strongly: you must believe in what you're doing. If you're phony about that, it'll show, and you'll give up. All right, you
100%.
must believe.
You've got to back yourself, and then
Yes,
because look, you're always going to get negative criticism, and
yes,
so if you don't back yourself, you'll fall at the first
yes,
hurdle, or probably before that.
yes.
Um,
And just to wrap that section, it was inspirational to me. And I will tell you that when I was first starting out, I, to say that I was emotionally immature, some people say I'm emotionally immature today. Well, I was a heck of a lot less mature emotionally or otherwise when I first started in the business. I was only 23 years old. I had gotten through this academic thing relatively rapidly. I
So
think,
on that, I guess look, so going back and rewinding to
yes,
your past, then. So you started out when you were 23, as you say, you perhaps weren't as mature as what you
right,
are now. I think that there's probably a lot of us guys out there that can relate to that, myself included. Um, I was always a bit of a class clown, but thought that I was going to fall back onto my sporting prowess, as it may be. Um, So look, in terms of how you first got, clearly you're a scientist. How did you get into drug development and the clinical research industry to start with? Because if I'm correct, your background. So you're from Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah.
It was quite a grounded family by the sounds of things. Give us a quick overview of what family life and your background was like growing up.
Yeah. I lived about a block from the East River in New York City on the Brooklyn side.
Mm-hmm.
A great view of the Statue of Liberty, a place I still have not visited as an adult or as a child.
Yeah.
But you could really just almost touch it. It was so close.
Wow.
My father and mother, typical blue collar workers.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't get between loans and some scholarships, I would not have been able to get to school. My father was a New York City Transit Authority bus driver. My mom was a receptionist. So blue collar, and we lived in an apartment, tenement building, a 4-story, a very standard kind of thing in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a car. We never had a car, and so we kind of just, I didn't realize it, but we were poor. but we had in New York City something that was very important for a kid like me. We had the public library system.
Yeah.
And if you could get to the library, and most areas of Brooklyn back then had their own branches. They may have been just small storefront kind of things, not much bigger than the room I'm in, but you could get to that. And in Brooklyn, we had a very, very most gorgeous building library. It was the Grand Army Plaza Library. And I went to the library to get some quiet, to not have to. The apartment was very, very tiny, and there was no privacy. Enough said about that. But at the library, you could, and I went there as 9, 10 years old, started, and I would walk to the Brooklyn Public Library at the Grand Army Plaza, which was a bit of a walk, but it wasn't a deal. You're a kid.
Yeah.
I was looking through whatever the librarian would allow me. I was there so frequently, I became friends with the librarian. One of the librarians, they had many. And this woman, she was an older woman. She was very kind to me. She kind of directed me towards science. I have no idea why. I honest to God don't know.
Yeah.
And I would just look at, and she would give me books. I couldn't understand many of the words. And she said, that's not a problem. Learn what the words mean. Mm-hmm. Kind of what you were saying before. Explain to someone what it is you're working on in a way that person who comes from the other side of the planet would understand. And that kind of thing
you start doing that. You use a lot of analogies. I know that I do it in my business.
Yes.
What does somebody enjoy? What is their focus outside of work? And I try and liken that to what we're doing inside of work. And it helps somebody to almost get that internal hook to understand.
I agree.
I think that's always important.
So if it weren't for the library system in New York City as it existed then, I'm not suggesting it's like that today. I honest to God have no idea. I would hope it would be similar, if not even better. But I became interested in science. I had no particular interest in medicine, in disease. I had no particular interest in chemistry, but my grandfather, he was interested in mechanical things. And so he taught me a lot about mechanical things, about the internal combustion engine, how that works, and how batteries work. And he was interested. He made me interested, not made me, I became interested because of dealing with him in shapes and how different shape things interact. And that's the only thing, James, that I will say that I took from my childhood that actually has some purchase or has some bearing on what I do. This interaction of various shapes. So you can think of it as a puzzle piece, the molecular target, and then the ligand or the thing that you designed to interact with this molecular target. Yeah. The shapes and the charges and stuff has to align in a way. So that's the only thing. But I had no particular interest as a kid, I had no particular interest in any one thing. My goal in life when I was 9 years old was to play center field for the New York Yankees. Now, at that time when I was a kid, Mickey Mantle doesn't mean much to many people who are listening from Europe for sure. But in the U.S., if some U.S. people get on, they'll know the name. He's one of the all-time. He's kind of like the Beckham of his day, for lack of a better description.
Yeah.
Very good-looking. Women loved him, and he was an exquisitely great performer and did things that were phenomenal at phenomenal times.
I'm sure a lot of people will have heard him regardless, even over here, the New York Yankees, it's not necessarily people will support them as a team, but they have merchandise,
Sure.
hats,
Sure. Oh, yes.
Like I've got a couple of their caps, which, to me, it's just sports and leisure wear. And when I've, worn it over to the Caribbean in the past, I got a lot of the American customers coming up to me saying, "Oh, you're a Yankees fan," and I don't realise that I'm wearing the Yankees hat. And
you got to be careful. You got to be careful.
Exactly. You got to be careful with it. I get it all the time. I'm going to have to get a new set of caps.
It would be.
You went.
I'm sorry.
There,
go ahead. No.
You ended up, I guess, doing a PhD.
Yes. Yep.
In chemical biology, if I'm correct.
Yep, I did. It was. Really, it would be today called chemical biology. At the time, just making molecules and testing them.
Uh-huh.
The biggest piece of that, though, was that I learned how to control stereochemistry, meaning carbon atoms can have the ability in the right oxidation state to bend light to either the left or to the right. Mm-hmm. And this is true. This is a very important phenotypic thing, if you will, that all the proteins in our bodies do, and almost all the molecules that are in your body bend light, mostly all to the left for whatever reason.
Wow,
that really isn't understood. That's an interesting philosophical and a discussion point. I don't dwell on these things too. It's an imponderable for me. Mm-hmm. It could be. It was just it just sort of happened. I don't dwell on that. However, understanding how to control it is very, very important. And that is the piece from all of my academic training that has carried me through to this very day. Because nothing about chemistry per se is as important as all of the other biology I have learned over the past 25 years. It is really, I was a very narrow, as I said, I was emotionally immature. It's very narrow, actually. I wasn't really, you'd like to think that you come out of academia, student, and yet you're an academic. You're thinking, you're open to if people pose questions, and oh my goodness, sure. No, it was nothing like that.
I don't think it's like that at all. And one of the things that I've taken from academics, and I also went to university, but for me, I actually went because I realised that I was probably still a little bit immature, and I didn't want to go to work. So the way to stay out of work was to do more academics. Yeah. So I had a general business studies degree. But one thing I learned from doing the academics was that just because you have academic qualifications, it doesn't make you smart.
No.
You get into the real world and you start, having to engage with teams and other people. You realize that there's a different type of intellect that you need to have in order
this idea of emotional quotient. This James, you have touched on my great failing for my time at Pfizer was my inability to truly grasp the significance and the truth, the absolute truth of what you just said. Having success in academia means that you did well on tests and you know things. It doesn't mean you're creative. It doesn't mean that you can look at a problem and bring a certain view to it that is different and by definition novel. It differentiates everything that's gone before. It's not simply a test. There's so much more riding on what we do in our business. And we're truly not supposed to. We really, most people in the business, really want to make a difference in terms of improving human health. It's it's not religion, but it is something that drives you when you're just too tired to think about stuff. And I think I think you're absolutely right when you say there's a big difference between knowing facts and being intelligent. And and I was not I knew a lot of stuff and I could do a lot of stuff. That stuff was okay, but I wasn't very intelligent. And
Hmm.
and if that's something that I have had to learn. It doesn't come to me. It didn't my persona. It didn't come easily, um, but it came. And but the point is that the experience that I've had along the way, the various experiences at different stages, as we said, we've talked a little bit about this. I think it's important to recognize that at the time that you're experiencing the whatever it is, whatever the problem or whatever the solution or whatever the interaction is,
Mm.
you don't necessarily learn what you need to learn at the moment, but it's there for you and you can draw on it. And I think over time, I'm one of these people. Oh, I should have learned this because I've been through this once or twice before.
Hmm.
But it comes, and once you become aware, I guess in a sense, it's becoming a little more self-aware as opposed to being a little too self-absorbed. There's a really important distinction there,
I
and
think
I
it's
think
what you and I have said when we've spoken previously. It's being aware that you're in the right place at the right time often, and
oh yes,
realizing what you're learning at a given time. Because I think we've
right,
both had occasions where we've learned stuff, but we haven't recognized it and we've had to look
right,
back on it. As we both said,
right.
the whole Steve Jobs quote of, it's very easy to connect the dots looking back. Um, but yeah, I think, and
Oh,
we've
by the
both
way, there's a guy.
experienced that.
I'm sorry. There's a guy who shared your desire not to have to go to work. He spent, 6 months or 2 semesters, whatever it was, at a school in the Pacific Northwest, the United States,
Mm,
and effectively because he liked calligraphy, I guess. And that's an important thing because of all the icons, all of the various types of print you can do locally on your computer. That's because Jobs apparently had an affection for that.
really?
He didn't. He
Didn't know
didn't.
that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that's my understanding of it. There are people who know much more about Jobs than I do.
Mm,
Uh, he's not one of my heroes. I think he was truly a giant, and I have nothing. I look to others that resonate with. It's like a human. It's any human being. If I were a kid 10 years old in Boston, in Massachusetts, the United States, when I was 10 years old, my hero would not have been Mickey Mantle. It would have been Ted Williams, or it would have
mm,
been this other Yastrzemski, whose grandson still plays in the major leagues, by the way, in baseball in the United States. Uh,
sure. So you grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Your dad was working the buses. Your mum was a receptionist. You had no real clue that you wanted to get into the world of clinical trials and science. But I know, I guess you personally, you've mentioned it several times to me, that one of your big things is about improving human health.
yes,
Um,
yes,
Now, I think at the time, I can't remember from when you and I spoke previously, whether you were at Pfizer or whether you were at Seprecor. But
right,
it was at that point where you took a journey, and I can't remember where you said that you were going, but you were on a
yep,
flight
yep.
and you had a chance encounter that then has kind of gone on to lead you to start
Mm,
your own businesses and go from there. Just sort of
yes,
share with the audience a little bit about that, if you can.
sure. The so um, I was part of a project team at Pfizer
Hmm.
that actually independent is an important point here because there'll be people in the audience who are familiar with the back. I don't want to leave an impression that is erroneous or self-aggrandizing because I don't tell the entire story. I won't take too much time, but it's important only from the point of view I want to be accurate.
You go
That
for it, Jim. You go for it.
thank you. Uh, Around this time at Pfizer, we
Mm,
were working. Pfizer had toward the end of its time actually actively working on antibacterial research.
hmm.
Pfizer grew up in that, like many American and European pharmaceutical companies, and but the for businesses as a business decision, antibacterials is not a good place to be. So they were paring down the portfolio and of discovery approaches, and we were toward the end of our time in working on macrolides research, erythromycin in this case, at Pfizer. Having said that, at this time, and I don't remember exactly, but it had to be late 70s, early 80s of the prior century. Many of the people watching who will watch this or were not alive then.
If it's in the 70s, myself included.
Yeah, there you go. See? So I'm going to give you some ancient history, but accurately. And so it just turned out that a number of companies, both in the United States and in Europe, were looking at a similar segment of erythromycin to improve certain characteristics. And let's leave it at that. We at Pfizer were doing that in different ways, and we've published this, we have patents and the like. But it turned out that there was an intermediate that whenever you made it, it gave you some other stuff. And this is true. The first time it was ever made wasn't first made at Pfizer. It was first made, I believe, at Roche, Hoffman La Roche company. It doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. In the 50s or maybe the early 60s. And everyone who made it since then, you'd make a couple of things, and people are so focused on getting the thing. There's other stuff sometimes to be learned by looking at. When I joined Pfizer, I had that kind of inquisitiveness. I did have
so you
that.
Like a secondary use of the same drug, almost.
It would be.
It's not its primary use, but it's almost one of the side effects, but a useful side effect.
In a sense, it was less a side effect in the sense that if you put reagents A and B together, you would get reagent. In the ideal's case, you'd get all of C. Well, in this case, you'd get mostly C, but very, very small and variable amounts of D, E, and F.
Right,
but
I see.
They were just thrown away because, as far as I was aware, at Pfizer, they were certainly, and it was true, had to be true because no one had ever reported anything about. So I became interested in this minutia and was discouraged, by the way, by people from, what are you wasting your time doing this? It turns out, at the same time, there is a company, I guess they're purchased now, Yugoslavian, a European pharmaceutical company called Pliva. And they were apparently brighter than yours truly, because the guy there was trying to actually make this minor thing the major thing by changing reaction conditions. I had no problem isolating the thing and then doing a structure. It was kind of like a puzzle. I liked that kind of thing. Yeah. My grandfather being responsible for that, I think. Bottom line was, that's how the program actually was started. And a person on the project team, Dr. Mike Bright, actually made the stuff that we call Zithromax, stuff that's the active pharmaceutical ingredient in the Z-Pak that is still sold today. I think zithromycin is still the second largest selling antibacterial, or certainly the second largest made antibacterial to this very day. I think that's actually true. Not that Pfizer makes very much money on it anymore. It's not a branded product. Bottom line is that.
So you were making Z-Pak at the time?
I had nothing. No, this is why I want to be clear. So Pfizer actually, we terminated the program, even though we had what would become Zithromax.
I see.
Then there was an interaction about 2 years after the project, because at the time we meaning Pfizer as a company was backing out of anti-infective, antibacterial research, certainly from the macrolide area, for business reasons. All right, and there's something to be learned there, by the way, as just an aside, and I'll come back to that later if I shut up long enough that you get your questions. But the point is that it was a team. That's the brilliance of Pfizer, actually. Pfizer, the reason they sold, well over 1.2 billion American dollars worth per year for several years of this particular drug had nothing to do with me isolating the first 15-membered ring AZA macrolide. Had nothing to do with that. Had nothing to do with the guys at Pliva who were bright enough, well, we can make this be it, all right? It had nothing to do with Mike Bright. It had everything to do with sales and marketing. Right. And probably a clinician who said, we only need to give 4 doses to cover 2 weeks. And we'll call it, and the packaging probably had sales and marketing. It was that interaction between the clinical, sales, and marketing had very little to do with the discovery. That was an important lesson too for me. Mm-hmm. Bottom line is that was that with that background, I just wanted to be fair to Pfizer. 3 people clearly very, very important. Dr. Gwen Dutu, Dr. Tony Knirsch, and Dr. Art English. And I'll say the reason Gwen Dutu did all of the experiments, animal experiments, that proved that Zithromax had a very interesting characteristic. It lasted in your body for days and days and days and days. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole bunch of science about that, but bottom line, you could take 4 doses and it'd cover you for more than 2 weeks. That's a big deal in terms of compliance for the patient. Number one. Art English was the guy at the meeting, and I was the guy that was charged with to give the presentation that said, well, Zithromax didn't meet the goals of the company in this area. Don't forget, it's already 1 foot out the door with respect to anti-infective, antibacterial research via macrolides. And we had goals that it had to have a certain activity, had to have a certain lifetime in humans, had to have certain characteristics. And it didn't meet the characteristics, even though it had a very interesting and highly differentiating characteristic. And only Art English and only Dr. Tony Knirsch, those 2 men said, it's a terrible mistake we're making to stop this. So I really think that, and they were right, by the way, and they came back in at the appropriate time when sales and marketing or the business development group at Pfizer was approached, presumably directly by Pliva, because Pfizer had certain intellectual property and Pliva had certain intellectual property, and we were at a loggerhead, I believe, in terms of being able to grow any kind of. Pfizer at that time was not actively pursuing it as a marketed product. Now, so this then all leads up to the story that at that time, all the way through that, from the time I started at Pfizer, I was terribly disinterested. It's a terrible thing to say, but it's the God's truth. I was uninterested in the effects of the things that I designed, imagined, created in terms of their treatment of humans.
Okay, so at Pfizer, you weren't into your work as much as what one would otherwise think that you should be, and perhaps just not.
I was into my work.
The greater good that you were doing.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was into my work. I worked very, very hard, and I really loved doing what I did. But I did it for intellectual pleasure, personal, like I could do this. You can't, kind of, a very childish kind of thing.
So it's kind of almost that self-satisfaction of, I've worked this out. I've calculated this. This is what I've developed. Next. Done. Kind of mentality, almost a bit of it was the gym show rather than what am I doing to help? Improve the health of people.
It's a terrible thing. This human characteristic that we must guard against, self-absorption. It was awful. I had a very bad case of it. Apparently, it's an inducible gene. We must all be careful. And so I didn't really look at my efforts as a world impacting thing. So this gets to the point a long way around, but the truth of it is important. So I was invited to give a talk at a conference in Geneva. I was flying back to New York and from Geneva. And I was a business class ticket and I wasn't paying for it. And so I sat next to, by chance, this elderly woman, extraordinarily bright, very, very articulate, spoke several languages, and dressed in the most immaculate. And I was so impressed by the quality of the stuff. Having said that, I saw all that, but then when I'm on a plane, I put my earplugs in, open a book, I hopefully fall asleep. Mm-hmm. This lady who was inquisitive and probably a lot more certainly more thoughtful than I, probably if she were alive, she probably not to this day. She tapped me on my hand because I had my hand in, and yes, ma'am. And she said, "What's your name, young man?" And, "Oh, my name's Jim." "What do you do, young man?" And I said, well, I work in drug discovery. We work to try to discover medicines.
Yeah.
And she said, well, have you ever done that? Have you ever been successful at doing that? I had to
Well, she
stop for a
was
second.
giving you a grilling in a polite way.
Well, yeah, but yeah, right. It wasn't like your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
It was like, or a teacher. It was more like she was interested
Just
in trying to.
genuine interest. Yeah.
Yeah. She was interested in all the things that she could touch. She was she was absolutely 180 degrees the opposite way. She was totally, her view was so wide angle. My view was, and more reflected in. She
Yeah.
was a model in many respects for all of us in this respect, that she had a wide angle lens. So, and I stopped and I thought, well, yeah. Well, I said, well, yes, ma'am. I was a member of a project team that ultimately a drug is on the market, and we worked very hard and contributed in a meaningful way to do that. So the answer is, yeah, we've done that.
Yeah.
So she said, well, really, what kind of drug? And so I gave her the talk, the little spiel about, and during it, she was a very bright faced, but she became not sad, but I could see she was thinking she was withdrawn for a second. And clearly I thought, well, time to stop the conversation. She looked away out the window, the airplane window. I put the thing back on, blah, I'm happy, almost dozing.
Thought
She
nothing
taps
of
me.
it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that was that. Tapped me on the hand. She goes, I need to thank you. I said, excuse me, ma'am? She goes, you saved my son's life.
Wow.
And that little interaction, it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes of time. Now,
Her son had utilized
had taken it for
benefited from that.
right,
Wow.
yes, yeah. And so I never, this is my way, I did not pry into how. If she offered, I would have listened, and she didn't. But the point was, she was quite clear about, and she actually wanted to define it so she was certain that I was talking about the same thing. And she said, well, that saved my son's life. And that changed me. It made me a better, first of all, it made me really look at myself in a, like, Jesus, you gotta grow up, man. You can be better than you are. And I don't mean better in terms of, I've had lots of publications, lots of patents, all by any metric that one would grade a contributor to the scientific literature. But I was not really making the kinds of contributions that you could and that were meaningful. And I had never made the connection. It was so awful in a way.
I get it, Jim. I think, in the past, sometimes just through, being in sports and even working at previous sales companies and recruitment companies, I've been head down and so focused on what I do. Before, prior to running the Huxley Morton business, right, I hadn't looked at the bigger picture of, actually, if I want to be a leader, it's not about what I do individually, it's about what I do collectively.
You're right. There's a quote I read a long time ago, and I read it recently, a couple of weeks ago, just by chance in some document. If you're not willing to serve, you're not fit to lead. And that is, there's so much. I mean, it's a little pithy, and people say, oh, these catch-all phrases. Some of them have meaning, real meaning. And anyway, the interaction that you reminded me of changed my life. It made me a better human being. Ultimately, I'd like to, certainly better than the person who sat next to that lady. When I walked off the plane, I was better.
Yeah. Right? When are we going back to then? Was that, did you say the 70s that was, or late 70s? This is about, I was still at Pfizer. It was in the early, about 91, right around. Because now Pfizer had developed, now Pfizer, by the way, developed Zithromax. It is a Pfizer development. I just want to be clear in terms of the contributions and who did what, and I, not in the context of, I don't want to mislead anyone. I want to make sure that Pliva understand, to the extent that people care about this thing, I care about it. I want to represent myself in an authentic way. I wouldn't have cared, by the way, the guy that sat down next to that lady wouldn't have given two hoots what anybody thought. Yeah, we discovered that. That would have been it. It would have been a better interview. It would have taken less time. But the bottom line is,
Authenticity is important for all of us in a lot of ways. And this is an important thing to me. Having said that, it was like, it had to be the very, very beginning of 1990,
Yeah.
91.
So
And
that's
that's,
where you realized that actually it wasn't the gym show anymore, and
yeah,
actually you were
yeah,
doing probably more than you recognized for people externally, and
right.
something inside you switched.
I did.
Look, from there, I know from that point on, you went to Seprecor, I
Yep.
believe was the
Yep.
company.
That's right.
You were
In
there as a
90,
senior VP for
yep, 8, 9,
8 years.
yeah, 8 years. Yep.
Um, and that is where I believe you picked up a lot of your kind of business experience. So talk me
Yes.
through what was going through your head in terms of the move from Pfizer to
Yep.
Seprecor to then, I think it was 2000, was it 2006? You then founded your
My
first business.
first
So
company. That's
talk me
right.
through
So,
what allowed
yeah.
you or what enabled you, Jim, to make that jump from working at, a big corporate such as Pfizer to moving on and then entering the world of entrepreneurship where
Right.
you do have to be a leader, and that guy that sat on the plane probably would have fallen flat on his
Failed.
face. But
Yeah, it
what
would have
changed
failed.
with you over that period then?
Well, Sepulchre is an important experience for me because at Pfizer I learned every component of the technical necessities to get a idea into a project, and the project through into the clinic, and through the clinic to become an approved drug.
Yeah.
Every aspect of it, Pfizer was very good about that for me. I did not have access to the connections. One thing Pfizer did teach me: when you start a program, you start from the population that is going to buy, if you will, or use the drug.
Mm-hmm.
What does that population identify? A population, define its needs, define the qualities or the characteristics of the thing. So you work backwards. You don't. It's like, I have a great idea. Oh, that's a really good scientific notion.
More like
That's
a
not.
problem solving solution to something that already exists.
Yeah, yeah. What you need is you need to focus your efforts to answer real life questions
Mm-hmm.
that are not being answered. You don't want to. Again, the difference is today there is a focus, and it should be, on answering not incremental improvements, truly differentiated improvements. The thing that if you expect to sell it, the thing that you expect to sell must be differentiated and must be an improvement, and not just an incremental, a true outcomes based improvement. And that is a higher hurdle, but it's the right kind of hurdle, I believe. Having said that, I learned, fortunately, because my boss, Tim Barbrick, the guy that was a co-founder and was CEO of Seprecor,
Mm-hmm.
he allowed me. I knew nothing about the business other than the idea of where you start. You start from the population, the disease population, going backward. You don't start from, I just discovered an interesting little thing in the lab.
Yeah.
Can we make it work somehow? No, no, no. That's not how you do it. He allowed me to participate very quietly most of the time in some of these business meetings. Some he excluded me because it would have been a waste of it would have been like truly the 58th wheel of a 3-wheel tricycle. Don't need it. Just don't need it. You just do what you do, Jim.
Yeah.
And what was important, it became clear to me that I had learned enough that I wanted to do some things in terms of therapy that Seprecor just wasn't going to do. And the other thing that you said, well, what allowed me to do it? Stock options. I was very fortunate that I received a significant amount of stock options, and in the time that I was there, most of the time, the options became valuable.
Well, I say, look, I guess the finances always come into it when starting a business, but
Yeah.
I guess probably more so what I mean is what allowed you mentally to
Oh,
make that
yes.
switch from, because as I say, look, probably the guy that was,
Yeah.
Jim sitting on the plane
Well,
prior to speaking to
right.
this lady and the chance encounter maybe wasn't ready to start a business. So
Yes.
what changed with yourself
I
personally?
I believe the reason was as I said, Seprecor, or for that matter, any other company that was trying to recruit me from Seprecor at that time, they weren't doing anything at all that I thought was relevant to the kinds of things that I knew there were disease populations that were needing. They were in desperate need of some new agent to assist in their treatment. And I felt that I had an idea or two, relevant ideas to treatment, and I needed to try them. And I couldn't convince anybody. I couldn't convince early on. I couldn't convince anyone within the organization. Now, my skills, if to the extent that I have them, as I said, were not necessarily well honed with respect to marshaling everybody. But by the time I reached Seprecor, they were much, much better. I just couldn't convince anyone that this was really something. It was, and I knew if I were going to do it, I was going to have to do it myself. So the one thing that's connected then, that's important, as a human being, you have a responsibility to those who depend on you, like your family.
Yeah.
So I couldn't, without having a certain amount of money put aside for my children, and so they would be able to pick a university based on their talents, not based on what their old man could or could not afford.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done this. It would have been immoral, in my view, to do that. It would have been truly, it wouldn't have been risk taking. It would have been awful. It would have impacted individuals that they don't deserve to be impacted negatively. You always have to think when you step out of the airplane, when you have the parachute in your back, that's too late to think about, did I fold this thing right? You know, is it put in the pack right? It damn well better be right. And you can never say that in MAR business. In trying to discover something that is useful, a useful treatment for human disease, that improves outcomes in human disease, we can't, no matter how clever we are, and there are some brilliant, truly brilliant, clever, hardworking individuals, you can't know for sure. There is no for sure.
There's no guarantee ever with this, sort of
industry. It's just so the reason I was able to do it were a couple of things, both personal and professional, that I decided that I had an idea or two that I was foolish enough to believe I could get funding somehow. And I didn't use SBIR funding. I'm not even sure SBIR funding was would have been accessible for me at that time. I've used it since then, but I went to VCs. It took me 3 years.
Wow.
To convince somebody, and I don't believe I convinced anybody. I believe, and to this day, I walk into a room and I pitch something. If those individuals want to fund it before I ever sit down, they want to fund, if not it, something like it. And they can tolerate me, literally, they'll fund it. I don't believe it's possible to really move people who have the concerns of funding things off of some point that they wish to fund. That is, I guess I agree.
A lot of people kind of make up their mind before.
Yes.
Before actually at meetings. Look, as a recruitment business, we find it all the time. We'll put a resume in front of a chief exec who's heard something about, candidate XYZ, and all of a sudden they could perform poorly at the interview. They don't come across the best, but that person will get the job because the CEO has already made up their mind.
Yes.
That's the way it's going to go. I mean, sometimes it works out fantastically. Other times it's a disaster.
Yeah, it's a train wreck. Yeah, I agree. But I'm not, please don't misunderstand. I don't have a bad word about any aspect of the industry. I believe we've improved, like myself. What I've said about myself isn't bad. That was the person, and I'm somewhat improved. I'm not saying I'm great. I'm saying I'm improved. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect at any particular point in time, any organization, any industry, any individual, you're not that point in time. If you are the same at the age of 10 as you are at the age of 25, you've got big problems, right? And the same thing is true with companies. And so I've benefited remarkably, both personally and professionally, by virtue of being involved with these companies. It's been a great, it's not always been a pleasure, but it's always been beneficial to me. And that's something that I think pleasure and benefit are not the same thing. It's like something you said before. Not every opportunity is a beneficial one to accept. The game here is not here. The game of life is when is the thing that's presented truly an opportunity, or when is it just the train wreck that's going to happen? And sometimes we just, for whatever reason, we don't see the truth of the thing. We cannot see. We can't telescope out, past the next day. Now we get better at it with, as you said, more experience. Yeah. Eventually we get it. As I've said, my head has been held underwater long enough that I've gotten a few of these things. Bottom line is that's how I was able to say I could take the risk, and I give you the idea that it took me 3 years to sell the first idea. But I wasn't going to give up on it. I believed in it so strong, and it turns out that it was a good idea, and still is. And there are things from it that's working their way through the clinic, which is good. By the way, as a business, it was a bad business decision for me. I didn't make very much, but I wasn't necessarily looking to do that then. I was looking to begin. It's the best deal I could make then.
Yeah,
and make a better one the next time.
Did what you could with what you had at the time. From there, so Prexa was your first venture into entrepreneurship. From there, you started Ampla Pharmaceuticals. Again, was that more rounds of funding and to put that together?
It was the same VC who were very kind to me, Advent International, and that actually. Ampla was addressing a question which I've only recently been able to make headway on, and that is a non-peptide, so it's a particular kind of compound, non-peptide GLP-1 receptor agonist, small molecule. And the definition of that is I wanted to be able to operate and upregulate. I wanted to be able to administer something that would upregulate a particular molecular target, in this case, GLP-1 receptor, to produce.
What's that in layman's term, plain English to someone like myself?
It would make you lose weight.
Okay, so again,
same
thing. Metabolic
right. In this case, it's interesting. In this case, the little piece of it that was missing at the time that we had Ampla, and that I've learned about since then, the literature of the world has helped. There are specific cells in the gut that release GLP-1, the ligand, the thing that is the thing that we make that normally turns on this molecular target to do what it does. And the bottom line here is that this is the connection between the gut and brain but you don't need necessarily to get to the site where the cells that we thought we needed to get to, which are in the pancreas. We can do this remotely from the gut. And that's been a major thing. And we have some intellectual property that both allowed patent in 2019, and we have a few other patent applications in front of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and they're working their way through. So it's an important kind of thing. It's not revolutionary; it's evolutionary, and I'm dependent upon science across the board, much of which I just am able to read. And that's an important point too. That if you want to be involved in treating disease, you have to know a lot more than just where you start. It's not enough to be a biologist or a chemist. You got to become a drug. People use the phrase drug hunter. That's becoming kind of like a joke. Right. It shouldn't be. But I like to think that you need more bullets, if you will, or you need to be able to deliver every punch that you that is known in a sequence that you understand that can hurt the opponent. And that means that if you're left-handed, then you better strengthen your right hand. So
Yeah.
I'm left-handed, and when I came to Pfizer, I knew all there was to know and more in many respects about creating molecules, putting them together in a very specific way. I knew nothing, absolutely nothing of any significance or any useful thing about biology. But I'm not 23 years old, unfortunately, any longer. I'm a lot older, and I've learned a lot of biology. So when people ask me, well, what's your background? My background is I spent a lot of time in the library. And I don't mean that as a facetious thing. As a kid, I did, but even as an adult, even when I was
Always been learning.
yes,
Whether
and
it's
still
been, whether it's been the science side of things, or whether it's been your time at
yes,
Seprecor, which has been the business
yes,
side of things,
yes,
all has wrapped up to the point where you've then been able to go on, start your own businesses, sell your own businesses, to the point where you're now with Sensor, and again, same focus on weight loss and metabolism,
metabolic diseases. Yep,
etc.,
that's right. That's right.
and producing drugs that assist with that. And I'm assuming that because one thing again, that I'm into health and fitness, and I know that once you start to diet and restrict food, your body produces natural hormones and things. I can't remember what it's called. I think one of them begins with L. You perhaps might be able to help me out.
Well, there's leptin.
That's the one. That's what I've heard of. So it produces more leptin. So actually, you start to, it increases the hormone, or the hunger hormone is what I believe.
Well, there's a balance here. We don't need to take time, but the point is, leptin is in that. Ghrelin is another. There are and GLP-1, the thing I mentioned, is also involved. There's a bunch of redundant. You may wonder why. I'm sure there's an evolutionarily driven reason. But you're right. If as you restrict your diet, or you put things into your diet, you can either stimulate or retard production of endogenous hormones.
Yeah.
And in the metabolic disease area, it's a very complicated thing. And I'll point out that some of that is related to the fact that it has a connection to things that we think of as non-metabolic disease traditionally. It's very clear that type 2 diabetics and obesity or overweight, eating behavior, and depression are all interrelated mechanistically in disease. And this notion you started with is, the foods you eat affect your mood.
Your mood,
truly,
massively. So, and you're developing drugs to assist with that, and assist with, obesity and anything that is related to that. And also,
type 2 diabetes
then has knock-ons to mental health and a whole host of other sort of issues, right, Jim?
Yes. But no longer, I have no involvement, no direct involvement any longer with, let's say, anti-infective disease. Having said that, I have looked at delivering certain types of antibacterials and keeping them in the gut for diseases that are related to that are inflammatory diseases. And the only reason I don't talk a lot about it is I don't think it's the best way to treat that disease. Sometimes you need to do it, but I don't think that you want to introduce more anti-infective agents. And I have nothing to do with COVID-19. The work that's being done there, absolutely extraordinary. I realize there's a lot of debate and a lot of politicizing in different parts of the world. But if you think about mobilizing huge organizations, taking their talents and literally on a dime, it's kind of like at the end of the Second World War, when the Allies were, moving on a very broad front, and the Battle of the Bulge, December of 1944, late December 1944, started, and it was a terrible thing. American troops, all the troops there were suffering, but American troops just by chance took the brunt of it. And Patton, the American general who was over 100 miles removed, literally overnight pivoted and went about 100 miles due north or thereabouts, north, maybe northeast, and attacked and removed the pressure on his American, that part of the American army, or the Allied army.
Look, I think that's, it's a good analogy there. I think over the past year, there's been a lot of pivoting from a lot of companies,
Yes,
us included.
all over the world.
In terms of moving forward for yourself at Sensor, it sounds as though over the years, you've learned a lot about yourself. You faced, various challenges, some, personal, and realizing, that you've learned these things along the way is a credit to yourself. But what are your plans moving forward? You mentioned, I guess earlier, that there's perhaps plans to sell Sensor, move on. What's next?
Well, it's an interesting thing. That deal is in place and it'll close. Let's hopefully in about another month.
Yeah, well, don't share anything that you.
I wouldn't. But
congrats so far. Hopefully, you can get.
So far, that's right.
Shortly,
that's right. But the thing that it has made me think about is that there are opportunities to. There's this notion now. So you're asking, what do I will continue to do what I do. I'm right now part of the new entity, the purchasing company. I've been absorbed into that.
Yeah.
And I'm the title is president and chief scientific officer. Since there are only 5 people in the company, it's a very large title for a very, very tiny company. But it is truly something that we can do because I've learned how to run virtual organizations.
Yeah.
Like trial and error as much as anything.
Well, you've done it previously. You've stuck to what you know, and I think that's what you and I have discussed as well. It's about having that personal belief that you can do this, and you've done it several times now. Successfully, and I'm sure each time you've had the naysayers and people saying, "Oh,
every time, every time,
have you not considered this? Have you not considered that?" You said, "No, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to do it."
Right. No. You're absolutely. And James, the people that have said, Jim, you're foolish to do that. You're risking, and they weren't being mean to me. They were honest. They were telling me something that I did understand. It wasn't that I was like oblivious to the chance of failure here. Boy, it's unfortunately it is an option, and if it were to occur, it would be awful for me and my family. So, but I'm committed, or as my wife said, you should be. And
committed, crazy. I think anyone who's we all get the same thing. I've got a lot of friends who
I bet
they do their 9 to 5. That's it. They switch off. Whereas sometimes I'm up at 4 a.m. and I'm still working at 10 in the evening.
I bet.
I still wouldn't have it any other way. And it takes a certain individual. And yes. Yeah. You get called crazy, you get called a whole host of things, and you get a lot of disbelievers. But I'm like, whatever, just get on with it. It's what I like doing. It's clearly what you like doing, and I think that's a massive thing in life, Jim. So from my side of things, I would say certainly keep it up.
Thank you.
Keep being yourself. You're an energetic guy. You've certainly got a lot of stories to tell. And look, in terms of a summary from yourself, so the plans are coming through to roll into the new company as CSO as it may be. What else are you looking forward to outside of the world of pharmaceuticals, drug discovery?
Well,
what do you get up to relax, Jim?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I don't like to run. I always viewed running as punishment, but I love to play baseball, American baseball.
Yeah, hence the Mickey Mantle.
I'm my son and I, every Sunday, now he's in Boston and I'm out here in San Diego. Every Sunday, we have a Zoom or a phone call with each other.
Nice.
For hours. I mean, the time just goes. And either he says, Dad, I have to go. I have to eat something.
And calls to my dad, to be honest.
There you go. and that's great. And the thing is, we talk, and he and I root for the same teams because he's my son, and he wasn't forced to do that. It's just that when I was 7 years old, my dad took me for the first time to Yankee Stadium It's kind of like if you were a Manchester United fan, you go to where they play. It's
Yeah.
like a
Old
cathedral.
Trafford, yeah. So you go.
Yeah,
It's just a big. I'm guessing it's just kind of an amazing thing as a 7-year-old kid. You're just like,
oh,
wow.
unbelievable, unbelievable. And these guys do things that you can't imagine how it must. It's very much like the Greek, the myths and legends from the Greek and Roman times. And
Mm,
and so when my son turned 7, I took him to. It was the refurbished, but it was the same basic stadium, but it was updated somewhat. And I took him to his first game. And
yeah.
so baseball is something that's not just something I do for relaxation. It's misery because your team
It's,
and
it's
my
part
team,
of life. Whether it's win, lose, draw, it's
they're
just
my team.
it becomes
My team.
that's
Yeah.
it, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah.
You can have a drink afterwards. You can relax. You can
Yes.
either moan about what the players have done wrong,
How awful.
or
Yes.
celebrate
Yes.
what the players
How
have done.
silly the
Right.
manager is. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It doesn't. It is. It is. I learned this. Boy, I've taken way too much of your time, but I read something yesterday about what's going on with the Super League and why the notions of the Super League cut so harshly at the fan of, let's say, the Premier League teams in the United Kingdom.
Oh, it has kicked off royally over here. It's massive.
The way it was described, it resonated so strongly with me. The notion that how would I feel if my team were somehow ripped from me and all of the traditions, all of all the times when you wound up sitting next to a fan of the other team, and all of those how it would be awful. And so I have no understanding of the business aspects of this, and certainly that's a driver. But the fans are important in a sense that these teams have no history, only the history in our minds. Yeah. I'm still 9 years old. When I watch, to this day, tonight I'll watch a Yankee. They're playing awfully terrible. They're terrible right now. But I'm watching them, and I'm just a 9-year-old little kid having a soda pop, and I'm watching them on TV. And to finish it, so I play baseball whenever I can, although I'm now with a bunch of very old people that they don't seem able to catch the baseball anymore. I don't know what it's about. So it's not as, it is something that you can do if you want forever. And to me, it's the one thing I do that doesn't change. Everything I do professionally is you must continue to grow. You must continue.
Whereas that's your constant. That is your go-to, your bit of an anchor for yourself. So look, I'm assuming that is what you're looking forward to getting back to, is getting out to some games, playing.
Yes.
Like that,
this summer,
down, right?
Yes. Yep. My son and I will be back in Yankee Stadium this summer, sometime during the summer, if all things continue as is, and we're allowed to see them in person. So that's what I do.
Fantastic stuff. Well, look, Jim, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Look, I'll share your details. I know.
Yeah, and
if people want to reach out to you.
No. Believe me, and the Gmail email is so please, you can share that with wherever with whomever. That'll always get me. It'll get to me. And I will answer anyone, like a student who may come across this, or someone who's thinking about a change in their career, which way they want to go. I will answer any email that they send. I expect none from people wanting any scientific advice, but I do expect that there could be people that will come across this by chance and are moved to say, well, I'd like to talk to that guy about something that has nothing to do with how he earns his daily bread. And I promise I will respond to anyone who contacts me.
Jim, you're a fantastic man, and look, hopefully you don't get too much grief about the Yankees on that mail. But yes, aside from that, look, it's been fantastic having you on the show. So look, thanks again.
You're very welcome, James, and thank you. I mean, thank you for getting in touch with me. I greatly appreciate. You've made me think about things in a way I would not have, and I greatly appreciate that. You have a great week now. Thank you.
You are very welcome.